This is Governor Larry Hogan, and I don't always have time to listen to podcasts, but I do enjoy listening to the Maryland Crabs podcast.
Live from a grungy kitchen table located in Annapolis, Maryland's scenic and historic capital, it's the Maryland Crabs podcast. With each episode, your hosts, Tim Hamilton, John Frenay, and the occasional guest will dive in and pick apart the stuff that really matters most to you. We're too lazy to actually solve any of these problems, but we can definitely stir the pot. From schools, politics, parking in the fire lane, to those horrible people who drive BMWs. And here with this week's episode, live from the kitchen table, Tim Hamilton and John Frenay.
All right, well, here we are at the Commons, and we're returning a favor, actually, today. We have Greg Klein and Brian Griffiths with us as guests, and Tim is actually here today, too. He's down there at the end of the table pushing the buttons, hopefully.
On a Saturday afternoon.
Greg and Brian are the founders and the people behind Red Maryland, which is Red Maryland Network, which is decidedly, unabashedly, unapologetically leans toward the conservative and the right, which is absolutely fine.
Yes.
And you have established this great network of content on the website, and the Red Maryland Network podcast, which has... We were talking a little bit before, you had 1.7 days of content.
At one point, we were running 7 days a week, not us running 7 days a week. We had other people who were doing content, too.
But there's two. You've got the air raid that you do on Sunday nights, and then Wednesdays or Thursdays, depending on how your schedules work. You've got...
This is the Red Maryland, the flagship. That's the one consistent show throughout the history of the network.
And
that's now broadcast on Facebook Live, too, because for reasons that just defy comprehension, people wanted to watch video. I don't know why anybody would want to watch video of us sitting at a desk doing.
I'm looking around the table here, and everybody here's got the face for radio.
Yeah, so definitely.
Hey.
But and you guys did a great thing back in May. You said, "Hey, let's have this podcast month."
Yes.
And you went out and you invited people to share different things. I know we ran some commercials.
Podcast month for Maryland.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. Maryland Podcast Month.
And it was go check out Red Maryland. I don't care whether you're blue or red or whatever. Just check them out. Maybe not. Go check out Ms. Maryland, Soul Force Politics, which is Heather Mazur's thing. We've got the Maryland Crabs. You've got the Daily News Brief. You've got several other ones. Liz Murphy and her Naptown Pintcast, which was great, really, sort of to bring the whole podcast thing up. And in the month of May, we jumped on the phone with you for one of your episodes for a little bit, and schedules didn't work out, and here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, no, it was great. That was great. And we're podcasters. We've been podcasting since 2011. We're fans of the medium. We want to help it grow. And the podcast month was a great idea that Brian spearheaded. You guys were a big help and cheerleading that. And, it wasn't just political stuff. We do political stuff, state and local politics from a conservative perspective. But it was, as you say, it was, culture, food, music, sports. And there are a lot of great local podcasts. There's a history podcast too. And there were, it was great to expose all these folks and see that there's a community of people and a very diverse community. And, it was nice to work with you guys because it wasn't just us doing it. And people saw that we didn't just want conservative podcasters because frankly, outside of us, there really aren't any.
Although you got accused of it.
I know. You're suspicious, and I get that because that is where we come from. But you guys were helpful in saying, no, that's not it. And we showed that. And hopefully next month it'll be bigger and better and get more people into listening to podcasts, and particularly those who are produced locally, which is a lot of great work.
And I'll admit, I stole the idea. One of the podcasts I listen to, it's a great podcast, totally nerdy. It's called Weather Brains, and there is a national weather podcast month, every year. So they bring together a whole bunch of weather podcasts, ones that I didn't know existed. So I was just driving down the road one day, listening to that, and said, that would be a great idea because there's got to be a bigger ecosystem of Maryland politics than I know. Maryland podcasts than I know of. So let's find it. Let's find it. Let's see what we can do. And and the rising tide will hopefully lift all the boats.
Well, we were talking about that before. We said that, I could lose my XM radio because all I listen to now are podcasts. And there's so many podcasts out there that are fantastic, and it gives everyone a voice. So if you got mics and you got a computer that you can have a podcast, The problem is finding them. So there's gems out there that are just amazing, but there's no centralized place. There's no centralized way to find podcasts, especially in Maryland, that you could find.
Yeah, realistically, you have to know what niche you're looking for and hope what niche your podcast is going to be part of, and hope that somebody in their search of Stitcher or iTunes or Google finds that. And it's kind of like finding a needle in a haystack. Not every podcast is going to have like the big marketing push behind it.
Well, I'll tell you, it's funny. It's sort of with my Facebook page, All Annapolis. We grew. One weekend, we were at about 3,000 likes. I think they might have been called fans at the time. Facebook changes all the time. I woke up one morning and it was like 13,000. It was just over a weekend. I'm like, what the hell? And somebody had picked it up, shared something or other, and it was like, where did that come from? And then we grew. We got to about 70, and I took a stupid picture at the corner cafe in Riva, which it was a sign bought at Michael's that said, "We don't have Wi-Fi. Pretend like it's 1982 and talk to somebody." Stupid sign, but the fat Jewish picked it up and
stole it.
Well, he stole it, but
he steals
all of a sudden
everything.
we jumped from 70 to like 120, and again overnight I'm like, wow, and we of course lost a bunch because they're like looking for cute signs from Michael's. That's just not what it is. But it was just pretty amazing that you got that. And it's all about getting discovered. And I find that both in the Maryland Crabs and the Daily News Brief, and certainly I'm sure you see it with all the ones that you produce. That it's slowly growing, and you've got a liberal audience as well.
Yeah, and if there's one thing that we've learned from kind of like the things that we write, the things that we talk about, the pictures we put out, is that we don't understand the internet. Because everything that we think is important, that is, kind of, oh, hey, we got a couple of likes. Everything that's like, hey, let's put up a stupid something or other, and then that's what goes. That's what goes. Bonkers.
Yeah, the stupid meme on Facebook
attention.
will take off.
Like
the long, thoughtful think piece about some policy thing. Forget about.
But last year when we did that petition drive to save the Maryland flag. That was just a stupid idea I had at like 2:00 in the morning driving back from the airport after a long flight delay. And I just put it up there in the middle of the night. And then a week later, I'm on TV talking about it. The governor's endorsing it. There's 50,000 signatures. And it was just a nonsense idea, but just trying to make a point.
It was a throwaway idea. It wasn't a nonsense. We didn't expect it to blow up like that.
No,
but in that moment,
incredible.
We tapped into something. But like you say, we don't get the internet. We keep doing this. We're ahead of the curve. Sometimes we think we're now behind the curve. We eschewed video for a long time because, like you say, who wants to see us on video? But then we do Facebook Live, and that's a big part of our audience is there. So.
And I will say, and just sort of shed some insight into the geekiness or the dweebiness that you guys represent. And I think this is a great story. But one night, I don't know what time it was, but you were perusing the campaign finance reports or something like that, which of course everybody does in the middle of the night. But you picked up that Chelsea Manning had filed to run for senator.
It was actually the middle of the morning. It was like 8:00 in the morning. I hadn't slept well the night before. I got up. And I was looking through campaign finance reports for something else, and happened upon this. And I messaged Greg, and I'm like, "You're never going to believe what I just found." So I just rushed something. It went from 8 a.m. I'm looking for something else to it's up on by like 8:45, and it's gone national by like 11 a.m.
Right. And
it was insane.
By noon, you've got 3 producers calling you to jump on about that.
I would think I was on the radio.
We weren't able to do the BBC interview. That was the one interview we weren't able to do.
Couldn't do that one, but I was on BAL by like 9:30 that morning. It's just kind of, and then I had to go back. And this is the fun thing about writing for the internet is that then you had to go back and start haranguing people for like the Washington Post and the New York Times saying, "Hey, we found this." Didn't find this. The Washington Post didn't find this. We found it. Just give us a
and
little
to their
credit,
which isn't always the case.
Right.
They did go back and change the story. It said it was first revealed on a conservative blog, Red Maryland. So we'll take it.
We'll take it.
But that was pretty impressive. And actually, for Chelsea Manning, I think it's pretty impressive. She can now put on her resume that she came in a close second to Senator Hardin.
Second at least. Yeah.
There are some candidates who have been proffered as the next big thing who didn't finish second. So especially if you look,
you're talking about Bongino, aren't you?
Bongino did finish second. I was actually talking about, there was a couple years ago, there was a U.S. Senate candidate, Chris Kafalis, who was pushed as the next big thing. And he got whacked. I think he got like 9% of the vote.
He didn't.
Chris Chafee, who did basically no campaigning other than putting up some 4x8 signs illegally in the road, like in the median along the road, finished second, which is still one of those just kind of puzzling.
Yeah, that's a kind of Republican primary politics. I mean, if you want to know, there's something about running for the United States Congress, Senate, or House that draws out the craziest people.
Yes.
I imagine I have zero,
especially on the Republican side.
Especially
Maybe it's also on the Democrat side.
No, there's a lot of Democrats too. But one of the reasons is, when I was active in the National Young Republicans,
I'm not saying that about Chris Kaffa. I'm just saying I'm a general statement.
But when I was active in the Young Republicans, with I have a national officer. I know people from around the country, especially like my friends in New York and in New England and places like that. To get on the ballot in some of those states, you have to put down a couple bucks, a couple like $200 or whatever. But you also have to collect X number of signatures. That's like 1%. Right. This is just to appear in a primary. Whereas in Maryland, to run for the U.S. Senate, it's a $290 check. So any Yahoo can scrounge up $290 can run for the United States Senate. That's why we had 11 people, I believe it was, run for the U.S. Senate as Republicans this year. We had, I think there were 5 or 6 who ran on the Democratic side as well. Every year like clockwork. I mean, there's usually between 9 to 12 Republicans running for the U.S. Senate. Now, there's usually only ever 2 serious candidates running. Mm-hmm. This year it was Tony Campbell who won the nomination and Christine Gregorian who had sought the nomination. But you always get some of these guys who are just either perennial candidates or have some ideas that, shall we say, are outside the mainstream.
Okay, well, I want to talk on the mainstream, and Tim can jump in here on this one. Angie Fucan.
Yeah.
She's a very sweet lady.
She was fun. We had her on the podcast. She was a lot of fun.
She's nice. We
had her on back in May.
We had her on. We chased her for a while because we were she's the Republican nominee for comptroller. She's the only candidate that ran for comptroller on the Republican side, and she's out there on a lot of stuff. But she is very nice.
She's delightful.
She's very pleasant, and we had her on. But we read her website, and she obviously she's tilting at windmills running against our current comptroller Peter Francho, but. She had this kind of weird kind of, I don't know. I don't want to describe it negatively, but kind of platform, and certainly not a conventional Republican comptroller type candidate. But yeah, so when we met her, she was very nice, but kind of out there.
But realistically, I mean, once you get past governor, a lot of times when you talk about Republicans running statewide, it's sometimes hard to find good quality candidates.
Yes.
Usually
something we've talked about
back in 2010, we didn't even have a nominee for attorney general. This year, we've got a strong candidate in Craig Wolf, who was taking the campaign to Brian Frosch. I mean, it's the best attorney general candidate since I've been involved in politics. And I don't remember who the Republican nominee for. Bill Campbell.
He's just forgetting you, Judge Bennett. You were also good.
Fair. Bill Campbell was our nominee for comptroller in 2010 and 2014. Great candidate. Absolutely a great candidate. Very qualified. But, all the attention statewide is at the governor's race.
So we interviewed David Lasher, who's running in Libertarian for Congress. He lives across the street from me. And we had a great talk, and he broke out right before we started all this election paraphernalia from other candidates, Democratic, Republican. A lot of them were African-American, a lot of African-American Republican that I thought was interesting. Right. And he said he was at some election event over in D.C. earlier that day and then up in Baltimore. And he said that all the candidates, Republican and Democratic, had gotten together and they were all the lesser known. And he just said the frustration is palpable out there that all the oxygen is sucked out of the room. And this is where, I would disagree with probably all 3 of you about media coverage and the biases and what have you. However, this is one case that I would agree. They said that in Maryland, as with other states that are just New Mexico, Louisiana, Illinois, where you have the same candidates and it's entrenched legislature, they said we can't get any coverage whatsoever.
No, that's true.
They said, and there was Republican and Democrat. They're just saying they're the favorites who are endowed and they are blessed and they're chosen. And he said the frustration level that they just can't get their message out. And then he said that's unique to Maryland and probably about 4 or 5 other states.
There's one good thing they have going for them now is the fact that obviously when you start talking about mainstream media, nobody's paying attention to the 3rd congressional district or even the 2nd congressional.
Unless it's a wacko candidate. And
exactly. Realistically, the only congressional district that's getting any attention this year is the 6th congressional district,
right?
The Trone-Hober race. But at least now there's at least ways to amplify that message using Facebook and social media, and it's very cost effective to get. You can reach 10,000 people on Facebook for like $50, I think.
Yeah,
so you can
have
do
zip
that.
codes, and it's amazing.
It's amazing that you can get that out there.
Yeah, but what you're talking about is part of a bigger problem, that there just isn't and it's one of the reasons we started Red Maryland in 2007. There just isn't a lot of coverage of politics on the state and local level at all. The media that's focused on on races, on what's going on the state and local level politically is nil. And it's worse now, frankly, than it was in 2007. Yes. You would think with the internet it would be a little, but everybody's obsessed with what's going on in Washington. That's what everybody talks about. That's what everybody watches. And even local radio and people on Facebook, they're still in whatever bubble they're in, obsessing over what the president tweeted. And meanwhile, there's very little discussion about what's going on in the General Assembly, what's going on the county council, what's going on.
I fall into that.
And you guys do a lot of local coverage as well.
Well, but John makes us because I fall into I quit Twitter like a month ago, and it's killing me. But for that reason, it's because I was obsessed with national politics, and there was not one story that I didn't know about within seconds. And I was just obsessed with it. And so whenever we'd get together, whenever I'd start to go off on a national thing, John would shepherd me back into the local, because that's what he follows. And that's what's arguably what's more important.
Well, it is. I mean, if you think about it, this is the struggle that we have, like Greg's talk about, with people on Facebook, people on Twitter, people we know in our lives. It's like, everybody's obsessed about Trump. Everybody's obsessed about the Supreme Court. Everybody's obsessed about this, that, and the other thing. Okay, tell me how this is going to affect your daily life. And then you get crickets. Whereas, think about, just look at the hubbub over the bike lanes down here, the school redistricting.
Which I hate, by the way. I saw him for the first time last night.
You and Greg need to talk.
I've written for years about the bike lobby.
I changed my mind.
Insidiousness of cyclists, and they're very well organized. They're very afloat. Don't even get me started.
They're very
loud. Go to redmaryland.com and
we
search cyclists.
Yeah, we have a long history of dealing with the cycling.
And unfortunately, we've got a mayor and a county executive who are both big into cycling. That's another podcast. Yeah. How about talk about that?
I was defending online. I'm like, give it a chance. And I saw it last night. I'm like, I hate this.
There are a lot of unanswered questions on that.
Anyway, sorry.
But it's like, people just don't recognize or don't care that, in Maryland, for example. See, I got a lot of garbage from people on Facebook and on Twitter because I didn't vote for Trump. He's a left-wing Democrat. I ain't got time for that.
Right. And people, he's right. You're right.
But my not voting for Trump did not affect the election one way or the other. Whereas if you start talking about people who can't name their school board candidates, can't name their county council candidates, and some of these tight races where a vote, a couple hundred votes really does matter, where it really is going to impact your ability to get out of your community when it snows.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I didn't vote for. I voted for nobody for president, and there was no way that I could go either way. But I've got a friend of mine who is an ardent Trump supporter. And I'm like, well, how do you feel about county council? What do you about? Oh, well, it doesn't really matter. I wouldn't vote for any of that anyway. What do you feel about county executive? And I think
this is why I drink.
Yeah, the apathy. I mean, it's like, this is the shit that...
Put a pin in the drinking thing, because I want to come back to that. But
this is you're right. Where it starts. It starts here.
Oh, another meeting. Great.
Right.
Is this an intervention?
That's when we could focus on you guys and your content. No, I'm kidding. But they couldn't even name who their county council. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, one of the reasons we started Red Maryland was because we wanted to have some people have asked us, well, do you guys just want to be a big fish in a little pond? And what we say is we want there to be fish in this pond. There just aren't very many media outlets covering this subject. Right. And that's really the problem, because it deserves coverage and it deserves analysis or whatever. And that's what we want to bring to the table here, and we have. And the reality is, it's gotten worse since we started in 2007. There's fewer newspapers, they're consolidating, they've got less space towards this stuff. I mean, a few years ago, we had two credentialed members of the State House Press Corps writing and doing work for Red Maryland. But that press corps has shrunk over the years.
And at the time, we had more credentialed members of the press corps than almost every newspaper in the state, except for really the Sun and the Post and the Capitol. We had more credentialed press members than almost every radio station in the state. I mean, it's just...
And even talk radio, local talk radio that's focused on local hosts rather than just doing the syndicated stuff. They're still all talking about the national stuff.
Yeah, it's very, very.
This is one of my biggest frustrations with it. And we have friends at BAL, and they do great work, and they're nationally oriented guys, and I get that, and that's kind of, but and they do some local coverage on stuff, but here's a station that's local hosts. We're not going to do the Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, conservative talk. But yet they're just doing, a shadow of that and talking about the same subjects.
And I think that's a frustration with me too, because not just is the fact that they're doing that, but the fact is that, BAL owned by Hearst. I mean, that's the only station, them and 98 Rock are the only stations in their network. Their radio cluster is just focused exclusively on Baltimore. CBM, I believe, is also under local ownership as well. So they actually are well positioned to provide this local coverage. It's not like, Clear Channel out of San Antonio, right, or, some of these big stations, the giant ones. Yeah.
But do people want, this is what we're talking about with Facebook and what have you, do people want that? Like the importance of what you're saying, actually is really enlightening for me, because I am the person you're talking about, is that I'm obsessed with the national stories. But if you provide them with the local stuff, will they gravitate towards it? They're like, no, this is what I want. I want to be outraged.
Well, you can be outraged.
I was talking
about local stuff.
Yeah, there's plenty to be outraged about.
But I think people take their national ideology, that's the Republican, Democrat, left, right, and they transfer it into a local ideology, which is stupid because it doesn't exist. So let's take the bike lane, for example. You and I are probably, on opposite sides of the center, and we would disagree on a lot of stuff when it comes to, core values and all those things, and we could have that discussion. But you and I are like, yeah, we both hate the bike lane, and that's what affects our lives more than anything, and that's the irony.
Well, though I would say I could present the cycling phenomenon in a cultural context.
True.
That the cycling community tends to be affluent, tends to be very progressive, tends to be very white, frankly,
right,
and it is very much antithetical to car culture and a lot of the traditional views of how Americans live their lives, suburban life, that kind of stuff. I mean, I could present that in a way that would tie into that if I wanted to. But your point is well taken that, it's just that it's just not enough of a focus on what's going on locally. So we could be conservative or liberal and talk about, bike lanes, but even in a transportation context, what's more important? People being able to drive their cars, serving businesses, or saving the environment, which is what a lot of these cyclists will say they're doing.
But people aren't parsing it. Like when you break it down like that, it gets interesting because you talk about the culture of the people behind the bike lane, and it gives you something to think about. It really does. But on the other side, I think people get tribal and they go right to their guy. And I saw that happen. And it's the only example. I'm not saying because it's red. It's the only example I can think about.
What you're saying, yeah.
Was that in the city council meeting when they were talking about not filling a position for the mayor, for Mike Panellini's, who's Republican, then Fred Payon, who I like very much. But we kind of went to that. Well, I don't see that happening when it was a Democratic mayor, and it was one of those things going. Well, it wasn't about that, but and the Democrats do a ton of that as well because I can think of someone else on council. But people do get tribal, and that's what's driving us crazy is because you always go to your corners, and even on local events.
And everybody, like you said, everybody kind of translates their feelings about national stuff to local stuff. This year for the first time, we did candidate surveys. So every Republican in the state got a survey.
Wildly successful.
Which just was
wildly informative.
Yeah.
I mean,
in very enlightening ways in some cases.
Well, we know that our audience is primarily a Republican conservative audience. We had a primary coming up in a state and local elections, which is our focus. So we've been geared up and focused towards this year in that primary. And that was we did podcasts as well that kind of supplemented that, interviewing candidates. But like you say, there's a dearth of coverage. People don't know who these candidates are. And what we heard time and time and again, the feedback we got from listeners is, I don't know any of these candidates. I don't know any of them. So we had them do the survey. It was a very simple series of questions that we asked. Brian did a lot of the work compiling that stuff. We had the biggest traffic month in our history in, May and June, like many times over because of that. And it's sad that, it's great that we did it and people felt that it was informative, and I think it was. But it's sad that if it wasn't for us, there was obviously a big hole that wasn't going to be filled.
And John did that with the candidates too. John spent a zillion hours with all the candidates that were running in the primary.
Election.
Yeah, city election. And no, but we also had all the candidates for state and county.
Yeah, you had a lot that came through
in the
for that,
primary.
yeah.
We did a bunch. We invited. I mean, we didn't hound them, but we.
But it's fun. But then once you do all that work, and he did a ton of work. I don't know how he slept. And you go, well, all right. So who's seeking this information out? And that's where I'd kind of look at the electorate and just say, I think as citizens, we got to, as a country, step back and kind of reset ourselves to what you're saying is going, let's look at what's important and be informed.
But
you know?
the number of comments that we got, email, we got like Twitter traffic, Facebook comments that was like, well, ask them about illegal immigration, ask them about building the wall.
Right.
Your register of wills isn't going to build the wall. I mean, it's not.
No, that
it's
attitude.
not how this is going to work.
Right. No, you're right. And that's true.
It's there.
And even for candidates who might have had some influence in those policy areas, I mean, like, we didn't ask every possible question we could, but you've got their website.
That,
you've got, I mean, these candidates, it's the other thing we learned about candidates early on and about elected officials locally. They're starving to talk to people.
Oh, yeah.
They would love to talk to people. So if you're doing a podcast, you're not going to have a problem getting guests in an election year if you're talking to candidates or elected officials. And it's one of the things I learned when I became an activist early on is that, you can get the county executive to come at 7:00 on a Tuesday morning to speak to 10 old people at a Republican club meeting. And it dawned on me, I'm like, well, you could do a podcast with a much larger audience and get any of these candidates anytime you wanted. They're starving to talk to people. I was a candidate for local office many years ago.
What'd you run for?
I ran for the House of Delegates in District. It was 33 then. It's divvied up.
33A then.
It was 33A then. Thank you. It was a long time ago. I came in third. It doesn't matter. It was a two. Yeah, whatever. I lost. but you're dying to get to Canada. You want to do that. So when people have questions and they want to, you're right. We need an electorate that's more educated, more engaged.
We've gotten stupider as a country.
I think there's definitely there's a lot of stupid out there, but
or willfully ignorant. Let's just where people they're not finding out information. The number of people you try and have a political discussion and people, can we get away from the politics? I'm like, why? I mean, let's have a good discussion, a good debate, but not where you're spouting talking points at each other. But even I find that some of the candidates have gotten very shallow when you're talking to them. Going, it's the same old platitudes, the same old platform. Going,
there's certainly
one of the things that we learned from.
But here's the thing, just to finish, to button up what I was talking about. It bothers me less and less that people don't vote because a lot of people obviously take themselves out of thinking about it, and I'm not convinced anymore that maybe they shouldn't vote. Maybe that's okay.
You're right.
You want to go play, Skyrim online all day. Yeah, it's okay if you don't vote. I'm okay with that. But there are people walking into the polling place who are voting in elections who they don't know any of the people on the list.
If you look at our stats,
and that's what scares the hell out.
If you look at our stats, and you look at like Greg said, May, June, we had we were trending upward, metrics, yeah. But we went absolutely through the roof. The 24th, 25th, and 26th of June. People just finding out information right before they walk,
the day before they walked into the voting booth.
One of the things that we did learn, talk about how people are just focusing a lot on platitudes. One of the things that we learned from a lot of our candidate surveys is that there are candidates who they can get the 10-word answer, but if you ask them for the 100-word answer, there's not a lot of there. I mean, that's not everybody. Obviously, there are a lot of really good, really smart candidates on our side of the aisle, but there are some people who just watch Fox News all day and decide that they're going to run for office and have no idea what their job's about. We find this a lot with the Republican Central Committee, actually, because nobody, 10% of the population knows what a Central Committee does.
Knows that they exist.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, no, it's true.
10% probably know they exist. 1% knows what they actually do.
Well, it's funny. I got into an argument on Facebook, which isn't hard to do, but I think it was the Broadneck page, and there was some guy saying there, "Shoe must go." He's, we got to make sure that we vote him out. And really, it's sort of innocuous. I'm like, well, why? And he cited and I'm going to get the things, but it was up in Glen Burnie. Apparently, there were 2 parcels of land and a farm, and one was rezoned, and they're going to build a factory on one side and housing on another, 1,000 acres up that way or something like that. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, so what did he won't meet with the homeowners of the adjacent property. And I'm like, well, talk to me. I don't know a little bit more. And here it comes down. And I said, well, the zoning was changed under Leopold in 2010. I said, so why? I said, and is the factory and the housing being done legally? Are they looking for variances and whatnot to do it? I said, your beef is with Leopold, not with Shoe. I mean, and quite honestly, if they're looking to build to the letter of the law and the zoning, why meet with the people? It's there, it's legal. I mean, it's unfortunate, I'll give you that. But it is what it is, and Time to Talk would have been 10 years ago.
Facts tend to be irrelevant, especially when you get past that, that first level of information. Though Leopold's got a lot of free time these days, I'm sure he'd be more than willing to talk to those folks.
We've talked to him.
Oh, he didn't. No, he wouldn't talk to me.
Let's do a whole other podcast where we take apart.
So it's interesting to me that we had a couple years ago, or was it 2 years ago, or last year was Gavin and Mike Panellides. They're running for mayor, and we had the debates, and we also went to a lot of the debates. So we League of Women Voters, our debate, a couple other debates. And we thought it was interesting because when you go to them, if you watch one, you get an idea what the candidates stand for on a shallow level. When you go to all of them and watch them together, it was almost like a traveling act because how many ways can you answer the same questions over and over? So what's fascinating to me is that I think subconsciously they got into a rhythm with each other where he would answer this way.
I'm on a bike lane. Okay, now you need to say I don't.
and then Mike would answer another way. And by the fourth debate, I was fascinated. I'm like, this is like a traveling show. They are a team. They are a team together, and they're saying the exact same things over and over.
And everybody plays the hits.
Yeah, exactly. And but they had a rhythm almost together. You know, they were kind of friends in a way.
One of the interesting things
they seemed. I mean, I think Mike saw the writing on the wall too, pretty early on.
Yeah, the numbers. I mean,
they seemed friendly to one another.
Yeah,
at least civil.
It was very civil. You know,
and there were people behind Mike's campaign that.
I talked to Mike after the campaign, and he didn't see it coming because he blew us off for an interview the day after the election.
Okay,
and he said, "I honestly didn't think I'd lose."
I don't know. I read his Facebook post he put on the day before the election. That was not a guy who thought he was going to win.
I went to both headquarters. I went to his like within the first hour of the election, and it was just dead. They knew within the first half hour, but it's not his fault. It wasn't his campaign. He didn't do anything wrong. I thought he actually did a pretty decent job as mayor. I just think that if you look at the way that you throw the sticks up, the way they land, it was not going to happen. This is just.
I mean, Hogan, I think is going to win. I mean, he's the anomaly. He's the anomaly in Maryland. I mean,
he's played
as far as a Republican governor getting 2 terms. Mike wasn't that. Hogan is exceptional. I think he's been an exceptional governor. He's found a way to work across the aisle. He's found a way to compromise where he needs to compromise. He's found a way to dig in his heels when he needs to dig in his heels.
And he's ignored the national, he's separated himself. Yeah.
And something to be said about being able to distance himself from that. Mike didn't come out. I mean, he needed to have all the, we're a Democratic town. He needed to have all the Democrats going, oh my God, you mean this guy's a frickin' Republican? And it just wasn't. And it's not that he did anything bad, so he just needs to.
Also, though, Mike was running against Buckley. Buckley had the activists engaged. He had everybody, whether they were, part of the left or they're part of the center, if you will, of the Democratic Party, excited. It's the exact.
He's a fun candidate.
Yeah, it's the exact opposite of what
Mike was.
Well, I wouldn't say it's the exact opposite of what Mike is, but he's the exact opposite. If you're comparing this to the Hogan election, he's the exact opposite of Ben Jealous, who can't get anybody in Maryland to like him. I mean, Jim Mathias just is now running for the door. He basically almost endorsed Hogan, yesterday. We're taping this on Saturday, and the Democrats can't get away from Ben Jealous enough. Whereas, Buckley, with the combination of everybody was enthused about Buckley, a much greater Democratic registration advantage in Annapolis, I mean, it was kind of, I won't say it was, it was easy to see that it was possible that what happened. I was a little surprised by the margin, frankly.
I was too.
But
I know Mike also early on told me they didn't think he'd be running against Gavin. He thought he'd be running against John Astle.
I think everybody thought he would be running against
John
we
didn't.
Astle.
We knew. We sat right at this table right then.
Okay. How many Democrats wish Astle had been? When you drive by that, you wouldn't have bike lanes with John Astle.
No. But he sat right where you're sitting right there, and
it's true.
We knew after we interviewed him, he walked out, and we're like, "What the hell was that?" We thought he was playing coy, that he was waiting for it to explode at the end. They weren't prepared for it, and I wonder if he really wanted it, frankly.
John Astle was the canary in the coal mine, because we kind of picked up on this when Astle announced he was running for mayor. That's when we knew that there was going to be a good year for the governor, and it was going to be a good year for Republicans in Maryland, because when Astle's like, you know what, I'm going to run for mayor, and I'm not going to run for state senate again, then it became obvious. It's like, all right, he sees the writing on the wall, that there's something happening here. I mean, to be fair, Ron George had announced 2 years prior that he was going to run for state senate, and that was going to be a very tough campaign as opposed to the schmuck that was the Republican nominee in 2014. That was Don Quinn.
Oh, that's right.
yeah.
That's right. Don was a Republican, now he's a Democrat.
Some say I ran him out of the party, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I remember Don. He's lives down in Hillsmere.
I think he left the state, actually. I think he's gone, like, completely moved out of the state.
Oh, I did hear that. He's getting his degree or something like that. I'll tell you, let's take a quick break.
It'll be about time.
Yeah, let's take a quick break. We'll come back. And I do want to talk about some big news that you guys got coming up in 2019, which is not that far away from here, but as we talk right now, it'll be here before we know it. So we'll be right back.
September 29th, the inaugural Twist and Stout Festival at Quiet Waters Park along the shores of the South River. Twist and Stout, a Maryland wine, craft beer, music, food, and arts festival, presented by the Anne Arundel County Department of Recreation and Parks, along with the Maryland Wineries Association. Sample dozens of craft beers and Maryland wines, dance the afternoon away to the sounds of Saved by Zero and the Groove Spot Band. Watch the plein air painters and shop dozens of artisans, crafters, and food trucks. Tickets are on sale now at twistandstout.org. TWISTANDSTOUT.org. September 29th, Twist and Stout at Quiet Waters Park, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Tickets at twistandstout.org.
Here's to the teacher who spends her weekend helping children who need a little extra attention. To the soldier who missed the birth of his baby while serving overseas. To the EMT working full-time and taking night classes. To the police officers and firefighters working long hours away from their families to keep our families safe. Here's to you, our hometown heroes. I'm Alan Hyatt, Chairman and President of Severn Bank, and we know there are many heroes among us. Men and women who serve without expecting anything in return. Which is why we're honored to offer our Hometown Heroes program to educators, law enforcement officers, firefighters, first responders, healthcare workers, and military personnel. Whether you're opening a checking account or buying a new home, we're here to give back to you. Learn more about our Hometown Heroes program at severnbank.com. Severn Bank, here with you.
Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
And we're back after gossiping during the break.
And again, we've got Brian Griffiths, who is the Capital columnist for, what's the name of your column?
Yeah.
It's just a column.
It's just the Brian Griffiths column.
I write a column. People get mad. That's kind of
Yeah, but they can't.
Lather, rinse, and repeat.
Pretty much, yeah.
But they can't comment anymore. I love the fact that there's like a bunch of like commenters out there who are just seething in their houses and they can't pound on their keyboards.
I will say this.
I might think they're up in Boston with all those houses blowing up.
When Brian started, it took a while before he's gone full Griffiths. I'm not sure he's totally done that at the Capitol yet, but so there's
Ask John Leopold.
There's more. Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. But I like that one. That was the best one you wrote. But when he turns it up to 11, watch out, and he will eventually. He'll find something to do. All
right, Leopold and you. Well, you guys. What's the backstory on that?
So when I was 16 years old,
he took your bike.
This is not like a Catholic priest story, is it? Please.
No.
Well, no, he's not a cradle Catholic, so he.
No, I was a convert. That was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And John is not a Catholic by any stretch of the imagination. So when I was 16 years old, I was working at Kurtz's Beach, okay, up in Pasadena, and one of the things we always had coming through were political events, Republican fundraiser, whatever. I think it was a Ellen Sauerbrey fundraiser was there, and so this car pulls in to the handicap spot. And out pops John Leopold. So I'm like trying to run the parking lot.
No, he's a delegate at this time?
He's a delegate at this time. And I said, "Excuse me, sir, you can't park there." "Oh, well, I always park here." "Well, it's handicap parking. You can't park here." "Well, I'm John Leopold. I don't care if you're the King of England, move your car."
Right.
Which, of course, he never eventually did. But that was my first interaction with John Leopold.
It all went downhill from there?
It all went downhill from there, yeah. Which is funny because at one point Leopold was trying to reach out to me in good faith, and he actually appointed me to the Amusement License Commission regulating bingo halls, which I did for a little while before I resigned when the allegations started popping up.
It's funny how you can sour on that when you have an elected official. I remember when I was 17, I was driving over Montgomery County and going to the library, and some guy cut in front of me. And I honked my horn. Like, he blatantly cut. I almost hit him. And I was in the library for an hour and a half. And when I came out, there was a guy sitting there smoking a cigar. And I kind of vaguely recognized him. I can't remember his name now. But he was a state's attorney. And he sat outside the library because I honked at him, smoking a cigar, telling me how he was a state's attorney and how he was going to call my insurance company and my insurance was going to go through the roof. And I was 17. I was just like staring at him, just like blinking, trying not to cry, and just thinking my parents were going to kill me. And then he said, got it. And he chewed on his cigar and walked away. And he ran like for the next 15 years. So as an adult, I come back and see him, and I just like feel that knot in my stomach, and I had to go to therapy.
Yeah, there's a lot of I remember, and I won't mention names because this person's not in office anymore. But I remember we were at the fair at the Republican booth. This is one of the first times I ever volunteered as a Republican activist, and someone comes in late for their shift. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm late," and this delegate says, "I got a speeding ticket. That's why I was late." He's like, "Oh, you have the wrong tags." I'm like, wow.
Well, there was a county executive about 10 years ago who used to sit in the. She had a driver who was a cop, and they used to zip through town with the lights on, going through lights, and while she was smoking. And it drove me nuts.
It amazes me the arrogance of guys, as you point out. Most people, even in their district, don't know who they are.
Right.
they haven't earned that level of arrogance or power to act that way.
But they love just putting out there what they have.
More than you'd expect.
I went to the Colonial Playhouse last night. We saw Neil Simon's Rumors. I love Neil Simon, and this reminds me of what we were just talking about, where there's a gunshot. All the guests are trying to figure out how they don't want to get wrapped up in this, so they're all lying about it. And the one guy spits out, he goes, "I'm running for Senate." And his wife looks at him, just spits out, she goes, "State Senate."
Well, but it's funny you mentioned that because Neil Simon. How many people are going to think that the Neil Simon, the playwright, is the Neil Simon on the ballot running for U.S. Senate this year?
That's right.
I mean,
I'm not dead.
I'm not going to vote for him.
For Senate. Or for Senate.
Neil Simon is running for U.S. Senate. I actually saw my first Neil Simon sign. It was put again illegally in the median.
As an independent, he's done a pretty good job, I think, from what I've seen just on the surface. He was in all the 4th of July parades. His people were there going like, "Hey, we're not asking for your support. We're just asking for your signature to allow him to get on the ballot."
Right.
They weren't pushy. There wasn't,
It's very intriguing to me that Ben Cardin has run for re-election twice now since being elected to the U.S. Senate. Mm-hmm. And both times he has run against minority Republicans, and both times, magically, an independent happens to get on the ballot, self-funding, to run as a third choice. Just throwing that.
Just throw that out there.
Just throw that out there.
Well, I'll tell you, you guys have a big thing coming up in January, I believe.
January 26th
of 2019. And this is the Red Maryland Leadership Conference.
Yes, we do.
And this is where all the Democrats come together and go outside the hotel with their signs. And
you laugh about that.
You can only hope.
A couple of years ago, about 5 years ago, there was a conference that was down in Annapolis, and there was a protest because one of the speakers, who of course most people have never heard of, was speaking at the conference, and there were actually protesters at the DoubleTree lined up outside, and we went out and talked to them, and they didn't really know what was going on, but we got them pizza though, so we were nice to them.
I had to laugh when
pizza.
President Trump spoke at the Naval Academy graduation. There was the resist movements and everything else. They said, "Oh, we need to protest and everything else," and it was like, there's very little of a movement. It's just down the road and out. It's not going to be a long place to protest, and they did. They got about 7 or 8 people out there, and they had some sign of a sign with an acronym that basically spelled out like fascist under something or other. But if you read it down, it said F Trump, and I'm like going, if you're looking to make a statement, I'm not sure that, and I'm not a Trump supporter by any stretch of the imagination,
right?
But if you're looking to make a statement, I'm not sure that that's the right way to go.
The resist types, and again, as I said, I'm not a Trump person by any stretch of the imagination, but the Trump derangement syndrome that is out there, where where basically there is no red line for the protesters, where they say this is too far, which is disturbing on any number of levels. But it kind of goes back to that. Can you imagine somebody with their kid driving down the road and they see that sign and having to try to explain that?
Well, that Trump derangement syndrome is translating into local as well. I know I've got both Stuart Pittman and Steve Schuh are advertising with me, and what we do is 4 social media mentions a month, and I tell them,
Steve's not advertising with us. We're doing this wrong.
I'm like, it's Steve. I said, I'm not. Steve's the greatest, vote for him, or Stuart's the best, make sure you vote for him. I said it's very, very neutral. It's like Steve Schuh is running for county executive. Here's a link to his website. I usually throw in something that's really important to vote look at the candidates and so on and so forth. The last time I did it, I got probably 8 tweets, angry tweets, all from presumably Democrats, sitting there saying, you're just such a Republican shill and this and that and everything else. And I'm like,
no. Republican shill.
So I turned around and I copied the search link from Twitter and I sent it back. I said, no. I said, you look here. I said, here's every single one of the quotes, the tweets and posts that Shu got, Pittman got.
And I would tell them if they want to advertise to put out a message, you'd be happy to take their hard-earned American currency.
I have. I got another one with Alice Kane, one of her supporters, said that it was ridiculous that I said something about Bob O'Shea. I said, well, Bob O'Shea advertised with me, and she's there, and that's just part of the deal that we do. And she's like, well, why are you ignoring? I said, no. I said I contacted absolutely every single candidate has been contacted, and then Alice jumped in and said, oh, we didn't remember, we must have lost in spam, and we'll get back. And and I've not heard, but I mean, it's funny though, the vehement, the venom that comes out of there, and actually some of them are from prior candidates that had won and lost.
Well, the problem is I think everyone's so hyper vigilant now, and this is why I quit Twitter, is because I became the hypocrisy monitor, just like everyone did, going, oh, you're doing this, what about when your side does? And I was falling into that too.
What aboutism?
Yeah, but everyone's now watching what everyone does to it's gotten to the point that whenever a national story occurs, you go to the local, what does my local representative say? What's your statement on that? And do we have to have statements on national stories, or does it have to be that everything that the sins of others have to be vetted by the local elected officials? I mean, but we're all falling into that, and I think a few of us are stepping back on. We got to quit.
I'm much more interested in what the Democratic candidates, the Senate candidates. What is Sarah Elfreth saying about Ben Jealous? Is she going to embrace Ben Jealous, or is she going to run away from Ben Jealous like other people?
Well, I think
that's what I want to know.
Because if you ask it the other way, this is one of the things about this election, that of the many things that just defy conventional wisdom, there's not even the most conservative, right-wing, whatever, Christian conservative, Republican elected official or candidate in the state of Maryland. I've not heard one that doesn't embrace Governor Hogan full-throatedly. Right. But yet but yet on the other side, it seems like Ben Jealous is toxic to a lot of these people. I mean, when Ike Leggett can't endorse it,
I mean, Mike
can't even do the Mike Miller.
Mike Miller did look like a hostage there, though. He really did look like he was being held.
He only mentioned his last name in the last sentence of this endorsement. He really phoned it in, but at least he can do that. At least he can say he's a team player. There's first off, there's a real civil war going on in the Maryland Democratic Party. It's going to continue after this election.
And I hate to pull this in because I'm doing what I said I wouldn't, but do you see that as a national trend? I mean, I was thinking about this driving over.
It's part of a national trend, yes.
But I was driving over, I thought, the people who are looking at Brian right now with his Reagan Bush 84 shirt, and I'm thinking, I miss the Reagan Republicans, and does the Republican Party...
I miss, just like the guy from King of the Hill, I miss every day voting for them.
But do we see that the Republican Party fractures after, within the next few years, the same way the Democratic Party fractures, where you have the Democrat, Republican, and you have the groups that aren't just splinter groups anymore, and all of a sudden we're kind of in a parliamentary system unofficially where you have to build coalitions.
Here's a theory for you to completely disregard. If you look at the national numbers, and I'm not one of these people who looks at national polling numbers for Congress. I think that 90% of the people, 90% of congressional incumbents get elected for a reason. It's because
everyone hates Congress and everyone loves their Congress.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't get too tied into the national numbers. But if you look at the trend line that, the Republican Party is going to get clocked congressionally, at least in the House. Republicans will hold the Senate. More than likely, the Democrats will win the House.
I agree.
So now you take a look at that, compare that to what's going on in Maryland, where you've got the governor is, quite frankly, cruising to re-election. If you had told us the day after the election, 2014, man, the governor is going to cruise to re-election and it's going to be easy.
Most popular governor in the country.
We would have said you were absolutely insane. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And now he's probably going to bring a number of state senators and more members of the House of Delegates with him. So what you're going to see is that Maryland, Republican vote in Maryland is rising, where nationally the Republican vote is sinking, where in most of the rest of the country, Trump was the focus of the campaign, and here Governor Hogan was the focus of the campaign. I'm just saying that you're talking about potentially a dichotomy between here is a Republican Party that is losing and doing X, so here's a Republican Party that's winning and doing Y. And the same thing if you look at Massachusetts too. and some of these other northeastern states. I mean, there could be a clean sweep of Republican governors in New England this year, just based on some of the polling and how things are going.
And I see those Republican governors. I mean, if I look
Doesn't
at Hogan,
include Maryland.
But
Correct.
If I look at Hogan, I see Hogan as a traditional Republican with, that he's separated himself from the splinter groups that are forming and the fractures, and he's just kept focused. And I see the other governors who are in these Democratic states the same way. Who's the most popular governor?
Baker.
All right, Baker. Yeah,
Charlie Baker in Massachusetts.
But I would see the Republican voters in Maryland are along that kind of Republican I see, whereas, you see the more Trumpist kind of Republicans that have formed in Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, the Midwestern states.
Yeah, I think the governor, and this will be a big topic to bring it back to the leadership conference next year. After the election, we'll be talking about what happened in the election, where do we go forward, and also a lot of policy issues as well, and that manifests itself. I think I'm still a little, this election's not over, so I'm still a little cautious, and I think it will get closer. Every day that goes by, though, I'm just amazed that we are where we are in this governor's race particularly. Will the governor get the drive for 5 and get enough Republicans in the state Senate that he can sustain his vetoes? And what if you get a guy like Jim Mathias or Kathy Klasmeyer, who are Democrats but ran on working with Hogan? Are they then going to vote to override his vetoes when they get there, if they end up winning? I mean, and especially on something like redistricting. I mean, if the governor gets reelected, there's half a dozen story arcs for the next 4 years that are going to be fascinating. But one of them is going to be, there's going to be some realignment in Maryland politics. I think the governor is a moderate Republican. I think he'd like to be a lot more conservative than he is. He's thwarted by the legislature. I think Maryland Republicans, there certainly are conservatives, there certainly are hardcore Trump-type supporters, and there's all of that within our party. But I think by and large, Maryland Republicans have been pretty pragmatic because they've had to be. We've gotten our heads bashed in by the Democrats for decades. And so they see a guy like Governor Hogan getting elected and reelected and governing effectively within that incredibly hostile environment, and they do see it as a model. Now, there's a lot of debate if the governor gets reelected. What does he want to do beyond that? Does he have ambitions? There could be a lot of people pushing him. There's going to become a national narrative that we've already seen kind of shadows of, that he's kind of the alternative model to the Trump era and all that kind of stuff.
Like a John Kasich model.
Yeah, except Governor Hogan's a lot more effective and likable than John Kasich is.
Because he's kept himself out of the fray, where Kasich has jumped right into it.
Kasich also burned a lot of bridges with kind of the never Trump or hostile to Trump, if you will, types, because he just because he stayed in far too long and wasn't able to help focus.
I don't know that I don't know what's in the governor's head. I don't think the governor's thinking beyond November, nor should he. There can be a lot of people pushing him to do that. I don't think at the end of the day that's something he wants to do, because quite frankly, Governor Hogan, I love him. I think he's the greatest thing that ever happened to the Maryland Republican Party. I think he's the smartest politician I've ever met. He will never get the Republican nomination for president. He is not conservative enough. Full stop.
He can't be here.
He can't be here. You're right. I think he's more conservative. If he's more conservative than he's able to be. And I think in a second term, that's going to be an interesting thing to how that plays out. But there are people, and some of his conservative critics, who say he has ambitions to run for president and he's going to try to use his second term to do that. I don't think so, but
I mean, we've known the governor for a long time, and until that article popped up in the Post a couple of weeks ago where it said he didn't rule out running, I mean, that's the first time he's ever. I mean, I've never gotten the sense
He joked about it early on in his first term, but it was joke. There are people in his ear to do that, and if he's successful, if he accomplishes a second term, something that hasn't been done since the 1950s, if he defies gravity and gets elected, especially if it's by a significant margin. I mean, we still think his ceiling is maybe 54, 55%. Of the vote that he could get, just looking at the numbers. I mean, we don't agree with the jealous campaign's math that they can get all these votes out in blue wave, but there's a lot of truth in what they're saying about as far as the demographics and the numbers. If they really got that turnout, they would win. The problem is they're so incredibly toxic and can't run a campaign that there's no way that they could ever make that happen. But there are going to be a lot of people who are going to push the governor to do that if he gets reelected. And I think, frankly, he's a human being. I think he's going to be susceptible to being convinced maybe he could. And, I don't know what's in his heart or what his ambitions are. But it's going to be very interesting storyline in a second term.
To bring it back to Maryland, to talk about what, because this is...
John just got annoyed with me because I got you guys
all
off
about
track.
that at our leadership conference in January.
There you go.
To bring it back to Maryland, and then we'll get back to the leadership conference. One of the things that we've been talking about since the day after the election in 2014 has been that the 2018 election is the most important election of our life. And that's always been because, as Greg pointed out, the governor controls redistricting. The governor was pushing towards a nonpartisan redistricting panel as a permanent solution. The Democrats were never, enthused with that. If the governor gets reelected, which again it's looking like it is, I always joke with my Democratic friends, you guys should really push this redistricting thing, because otherwise, when the governor wins, you're gonna have guys like me drawing the district, and I have no mercy. But the governor won't do that because that's not his style. But the natural alignment in Maryland is not nearly as democratic as the legislature and the governor, like O'Malley, for example, gerrymandered the districts. I mean, everybody, the legislative Democrats want to talk about congressional gerrymandering and all this other stuff, but Maryland's legislative districts are horribly gerrymandered, which is why, for example, up in Pasadena, my area, District 31 forever was a 3-member district. Well, they split it. O'Malley split it in order to create a sub-district that's Brooklyn Park, Glen Burnie, partially because Don Dwyer lived in that district, and they want to take out Don Dwyer, but also it was drawn specifically for Ned Carey to be elected in District 31A. And you have little things like that over, all across the state, where some places are split into 3 districts and some places are split into 2-member districts and 1 sub-member, or some are just all 3. The districts are drawn disproportionately to elect white liberals, as opposed to at the expense of the Asian American community in Montgomery County, the African American community in Prince George's County, in Baltimore City. And the governor, I believe, is going to draw districts that are more that are more fair, hopefully single-member districts. That's something we've been pushing for a long time, and that are more representative of the population in general. That's going to bring Maryland's the General Assembly more into alignment, representative, not just of our political ideology, but of our cultural and our ethnic ideology, our ethnic makeup of our state. You're going to have, if the Governor Hogan wins, you're going to see a much different General Assembly take office in 2023. And that's been something that's been kind of our hyper-focus for a long time.
Yeah, there's one caveat to that, though, and that is, in order for the governor to do that, if he's reelected, he's got to be able to sustain his veto. And that's why that drive for 5 is so important, because the way that it works is the governor proposes a map, and the legislature has 60 days to
45 days for the
45 days, thank you, to pass their own map. Well, if the governor vetoes their map, then they'll have to override his veto. So the control of redistricting really isn't just the governor. It's going to come down to whether the governor's veto can be sustained, assuming the legislature doesn't do what I think would be the smart thing politically for both the governor and the Democrats. Well, maybe not the Democrats, but the smart thing for the governor would be to pass a permanent solution that has this nonpartisan redistricting process. But that's why that drive for 5 is so important as well. And if he comes close, if he's 1 vote short, and again, you get a Kathy Klasmauer or Jim Mathias, can the governor buy them off in redistricting to make that happen? That's going to be another huge storyline in a second term, and the fact is, if the governor does anything other than have Mike Bush and Mike Miller and DNC computers draw the district, which is how we do it now, it's going to be much more competitive for Republicans. Right. So the pendulum's all the way on the other side. Now, there are going to be Republicans who say the governor should let Brian draw the line. No one's going to say that, but they're going to let people like Brian draw the lines and have it swing all the way the other way, which they might be able to do, but that's only going to last 10 years because then the Democrats, if they have control, are going to say, well, this is just partisan the other way, and we're going to swing it back. The smart long-term approach would be to have a nonpartisan redistricting process that, as I say, is going to make it fairer and is going to be really hard because there's going to be a political price if the Democrats want to scrap that in the future to go back to the hyper-political partisan advantage.
Especially if it's passed by a constitutional amendment.
But that's what's at stake in this election, and people like Mike Miller understand that if Ben Jealous loses and the Democrats still have their supermajorities that they can override the governor's vetoes, he's really the one that's going to be running the state, at least in his mind. And I think that's what his strategy is. I think that's what he's telling donors to the Democratic Party and stuff like that. That's really below the surface of the governor's race. What's at stake right now that's going on. And that'll be the storyline for the next 4 years.
And that, by the way, is why it's so interesting that, Jealous having $300,000 in the bank or whatever, he finally put in an order for television commercials, $37,000. Governor's already spent $2 million. RGA's already spent $2 million. The DGA has abandoned him, which is one of the more fascinating stories that we've seen. But because Jealous is A, so far behind in the polls, and B, has absolutely no way to defend himself. I mean, there was an article I read the other day that was talking about Jealous campaign barely has enough to keep the lights on, barely has enough to print flyers and campaign signs, much less, go on TV. His consultants are getting paid, but, they don't really have a whole lot to do, for anything else. That gives the governor more time and flexibility with his resources to go help Ron George or John Grasso or Mary Beth Carrozza or Craig Giangrande or some of these other
and that's
Republican
the game.
candidates.
And that's really the game. As long as the governor's doing very, very well in the polls, that's the game.
Well, I'll tell you, let's wrap back. Tell us, or we got off track on the Red Maryland Leadership Conference.
So the Red Maryland Leadership Conference, it was kind of an idea I thought of kind of after CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, because CPAC comes to Maryland every year, and it's all this national stuff, and usually it's just basically a giant show and a production. But there was a void for conservatives to come together in Maryland and do this sort of stuff. There was one for a couple of years back in the early 2010s. But again, that was a national focus. I mean, if you want to talk about Benghazi, that was the place to do it, not something that was actually productive in creating Republican candidates. So what we're doing, we're going to bring conservatives from around the state together. We're going to hear it's a state focused for the most part. We're going to talk about some issues. We're going to talk about trying to be an effective pro-life advocate in a Democratic state. Talking about business regulations, and kind of, why, how some regulations hurt people, a lot of times often in minority communities. We're going to have a panel about Medicare and medical reform, but we're also going to have, Steve Shue's going to be there, Harford County Executive Barry Glassman, Congressman Andy Harris, if his schedule works out. We're going to have all of our legislative leadership is going to be there. And we're going to hopefully be able to announce more speakers, throughout.
Yeah, we've got 6 months till.
Well, it's not that far. It's only about 4.5 months now.
Yeah,
and there'll be people and experts that can look back at what happened at this election and how we can do better. And we've got some campaign experts that are going to be there talking about that. And then, like you say, we've got the elected officials and the legislative leadership saying what's going to go forward. Those story arcs that we're going to see in the coming 4 years if the election goes, however the election goes.
No matter what happens, whether win or lose on election day, somebody's got to start looking to 2022. We're not 2020 focused. If this is all about Maryland. This is all about getting to that next election in 2022. Because you can already see certain people already starting to jockey for position for the 2022 Republican primary. Take a look at. And Steve Shue has told us multiple times he has no plans on running for governor.
He told me that.
Take a look at his donations. He's a guy thinking about running for governor.
Right. Now, how do we get tickets? How do we go to this? Where is it at?
Well, it's going to be at the DoubleTree, right there on Riva Road.
Okay.
If you've been to a Republican event, chances are you've been to the DoubleTree before. It's redmarylandconference.com is how people can learn more. We have plenty of sponsorship opportunities. Tickets are available. Early bird tickets are still available for $30. So people can get those, and we're looking forward to it. No matter how many people show up that day, whether it's 10 or 10,000, we're on.
We're set for a good conference.
You've got a problem.
We're
with
working
10,000.
towards a great conference.
That's a problem I am willing to have.
That's one of them good problems.
One thing that Tim asked earlier before you guys got here, and I know that Mr. Klein over here to my right is an illustrious attorney up in.
I could be more illustrious.
In Dana, up in the Dana or whatever.
In Severna Park.
Severna Park. You are.
If you please.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a crowbar of a district.
Yeah, wow.
Ed Staples would tell you different.
You are. This is not your full-time gig.
Correct.
And you are an attorney. What do you specialize in, or not, or?
No, I have a solo practice, litigation focus. I do a lot of criminal defense, particularly DUI defense, 410-541-6 DUI. Absolutely. Absolutely can. Oh, I listen to your guys' shows, so you need this. Don't get me distracted on that. I have theories about that. But I do that. I do personal injury, and I do some general commercial litigation as well. I do a little bit of estate planning for regular folks who do that. I don't do the heavy.
How do you got a website?
410-541-6384 is the number. It's gkleinlaw.com, or you can go to SavernaParkLawyer.com. And specifically, we got some great information. If you go to one of these events you guys advertise all the time, and you want to be, pre-warned is pre-armed, you can go to AnnaRundleDUI.com, and there's a lot of good information there.
There you go.
Keep you out of trouble.
Yeah, I don't go to events.
Now, is this your full time? This is your full time?
No, obviously I write for the Capitol. I'm an analyst in the voting industry, but it's funny though, because we were talking to somebody recently, and they think we do this full time. Mm-hmm. Oh, can I drop this off by your office when the staff gets in? We don't have a staff, man.
We've gotten that. Yeah, I know, right?
It's like we have a phone number.
Is this in studio? Where's the studio located?
We finally do have kind of a studio.
Technically, yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Just happens to be the law office of Gregory M. Klein. So people think we do this full time. I would love to do this full time. That would be a good problem to have. But now we're.
I think one of the things we found, and you guys are much more successful in generating revenue from this sort of thing.
Yes, you are.
But one of the things we found, having the focus and the mission that we have, isn't going to be conducive to, a for-profit model, because we've got a pretty narrow focus. The guys who try to be successful as bloggers are all talking about national stuff, because that's the bigger pond to fish in. So we've never had that kind of model, but it's an extension of our political activism, and we've been, this is what we do. And sometimes for me, I know this year's been pretty busy. I haven't been able to do as much as I wanted, and Brian gives me a hard time about it all the time. But
you're singing my song.
But we have people who supported us, and everything that we make goes right back into Red Maryland. So
realistically, we lose money on this endeavor.
Oh yeah, we put in
based on
we don't look to do that.
Yeah,
we're not looking to make a living doing it. I think it would ruin what we did if we actually did do that. So
I agree. I mean, at this point, like with our conference, we're not trying to turn a profit on it. We're just trying to make, we're just trying to break even. It's for us. It's always been about the mission and putting that forward. Because, when I started blogging in the end of 2004, and I think I was the first Maryland political blog in the state. Greg had the first political podcast. We've kind of gone through a lot of stuff since then, as far as growth and contraction, quite frankly. We were on WAMD up in Aberdeen back in 2008 on terrestrial radio. I think the signal probably went basically to the wall over there. But we were on the radio.
Your listener loved you.
We were on the we actually, here's a peek behind the curtain. We actually ran a poll. We encouraged people to call in to the line one time, right? And so it's in the break. Phone doesn't ring at all. And so I come back. I'm like, all right, what are we going to do? It's like, well, the poll is tied right now, which was true. It was tied.
True. Yeah, technically.
It was tied at 0.
It was funny back at, I can't remember which election it was, but I was on NAV with Barbara Cox, who was there, and Dan Nataf, and Jessica Stroh, who used to be a reporter here before she moved down to Texas. She was just coming off of air, and she thought she had gone off air. And she goes, "Oh man, I can't wait to get the fuck out of here." and all of a sudden, it was just like this look of panic in her eyes. She's like, "Oh my god, oh my god!" And then it's looking at the phones. Dead silence. So she went and she did tell Steve Hoff what happened, and they did what they needed to do, and there was the apology and whatnot, but there was nary a letter,
right?
There was nary an email or nothing. It was pretty funny.
We actually got back. We were on radio again because it was.
It's the advantage of doing a podcast too, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, no. John said a couple things that I've had got an earful about later on. Just going, did he say? I'm like, yeah, he did.
You get in trouble, but you're not going to get shut down.
No. So that's actually kind of how, when that AMD thing lasted for maybe 4 weeks or so before the station was bought by Salem.
It was longer than that. It was a few months. It was the summer of 2008.
2008, yeah. So we did a couple episodes there. And then the station got sold. Salem bought it. They flipped it to
You're telling the story of the Red Maryland Network.
I am telling the story of the Red Maryland Network.
Okay.
And so then Greg and I spent the next, 3 years almost. All right, we want to do the radio thing. Let's get back into it.
Yeah, we got the bug.
So we actually had a deal almost in place to go to WFMD.
broker time.
And they're like, okay, well, you have to send us the tape. No, we wanted to come do it live. Because that's the thing. You guys had talked about when on our show that you guys thought it was nuts that we did it live.
Yeah, it's crazy. We don't have the confidence.
We do just about every flagship show almost on Thursdays is done live. I tape my Sunday show. Greg has a show called The Conservative Refuge. He
Don't
hasn't
do
done
this
it
to
in a
me
while.
here.
He tapes it. And when we do special convention shows.
I talk about cycling and clowns.
State party conventions. We'll tape those, but that's mainly because we can't get a reliable internet connection more than anything else. So that's kind of the thing, because we've had people call in before. We've had some very interesting people call in before. So we always want to do it live. So then we decided, all right, well, let's do this podcast thing. We'll do this, Blog Talk Radio thing.
You're burying the lead of the story, man. You are.
What is the lead on the story?
The lead of the story is, yes, we talked about doing that and we decided to do it. But the impetus for actually starting a network and really the kick in the butt was in 2011, our local Republican Central Committee had asked me to appoint me to the Board of Elections. And I never thought about doing that, but they were really looking to do that. And if I did that, I couldn't do Red Maryland anymore. Right. So I was like, all right, I'll do it. And then apparently the Governor O'Malley a couple weeks later rejected my appointment. And I found out later the reason was because Delegate Kipke had gone to Governor O'Malley and said, I don't want this guy on the Board of Elections, because I had written something critical about him years before. And one of the guys they were replacing was kin to him, apparently. So, and I said, awesome. That means I can do more Red Maryland stuff. And I said, the radio stuff is what I love to do. Let's do a Red Maryland network. We'll start with the Red Maryland. We'll take my old podcast. We'll do a radio show. We did Blog Talk. We were on the Blog Talk Radio platform, and we had other shows, and it went from there. That was the genesis. That's what finally kicked us to do it. So thank you, Delegate Kipke.
Yeah, I do.
And now we're on 378, I think was the latest episode of the flagship.
Who, by the way, if you listen to our network, you know that Brian starred in Bye Bye Birdie with Delegate.
I was not a star of Bye Bye Birdie. First off, Nick was the star.
In high school.
Conrad Birdie.
You were a theater
Chesapeake High School.
I know. Well, I was actually, okay, so what actually happened was I was actually a crew guy, okay? So I was like the head carpenter, the building manager, the whole 9 yards.
You're not helping extra really at all.
Brian's a nerd, film in 11. Anybody who listens to this is not surprised by that. I wear it loud, wear it proud. And so they needed extra people to be in the show. So I was a Shriner, actually, in that show. I actually wound up appearing in 3 different shows, despite my not being an actor.
Well, I'll tell you, I do envy you guys going live. We are taped, and I've got to bail out of here because I got to get to a football game in a little bit.
I got to move on. I got nothing.
You got nothing? Well, yeah, you've got no life. We know that.
I can drink when the sun gets to here.
But I hear there are lots of places every weekend you can go drinking in this town.
It's out of my house.
It's beer and circuses in this town. There's always something.
I'm having a pool table.
No, we ran the circus out of town.
There's always some kind of, Eastport Rocks, somebody drinking something.
But a lot got
live music every single
hurricane.
day. Live music every single day and beer every.
In the summer, you could do that. Every single day, you could do free live music.
Yeah, I know. I know that from you. But I don't know who would want to do that. But
check out Brian and Greg at redmaryland.com.
Facebook.com/Red Maryland, on Twitter @Red Maryland.
Yep. And if you're interested in the Red Maryland Leadership Conference, redmarylandconference.com. And I mean, this is a good place to go even if you're not the conservative. I mean,
you gotta get up.
Learn something.
Learn something.
You do, and I think that's a critical thing to be a good voter, a good citizen, to listen to both sides of this. Whether you agree with it or not, that's fine.
I think there are a lot of people on the left side of the spectrum, and who think, and the right side of the spectrum too, quite frankly, who think the other side, are the aliens from The Simpsons, and are just have 3 heads and 3 eyes and all this other stuff. And no, people are normal people. I mean, these are people who want to see their community improved. And they just want to help out.
They just have different opinions on how to go about it.
Right.
Different view. Yeah.
Absolutely. Hey, guys, thank you very much for coming down.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Definitely.
Anytime. We'd love to come anytime.
Okay,
After the election, we should do this. Well, we're busy Thursday.
Hey, check out redmaryland.com, redmarylandconference.com. Brian Griffiths, make sure you're reading his column in the Capitol, which comes out on...
It's usually the 1st and 3rd Fridays of the month.
Okay. Greg Klein, if you're ever drunk and busted, give him a call.
No one in this audience would be, but just in case, 410-541-6DOI.
Thank you guys very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
This has been the Maryland Crabs Podcast with Tim Hamilton and John Fernay. Sure to follow them at all the regular places, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and online at themarylandcrabs.com. Take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Now, get the hell out of my kitchen. Seriously, go!
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.